She had come to the pier because the world had felt too small inside the hospital rooms and too loud inside her own head. The Ferris wheel turned in the distance like a slow, patient clock. Kids ran with cotton candy, and somewhere a man strummed a guitar under a striped awning. The ocean sent a cool breath over the boardwalk, salty and steady. For 19-year-old Marissa Hart, who had been paralyzed from the waist down after a car accident the year before, the pier was a promise, a place where the ordinary noises of life could remind her that she still belonged to the world outside pain and doctors' names. She rolled slowly, hands practiced on the rims of her wheelchair, feeling the wooden planks vibrate under her wrists, looking not for pity, but for the simple human business of being seen. She smiled at a toddler who waved at the seagulls. She listened to a couple laughing near a hot dog stand. There was a small, private sort of joy in moving through the sunlight, in the freedom of being among people who weren't keeping score of what she'd lost. She wanted, more than anything, to feel ordinary again. If this kind of kindness matters to you, tap like. Then the ordinary cracked. 3 young men drifted toward the bench where Marissa had stopped. They were loud at first, in that easy, careless way teens can be, too loud for the music, too certain they belonged to every space they entered. A crude joke slipped into a laugh. One of them leaned in, eyes on her chair. Words, sharp and small, were thrown like stones. Marissa's smile faded. She tightened her grip without meaning to, knuckles blanching white. It escalated in a few seconds that felt like a long, bad dream. One of the boys shoved his boot against the rim of her wheelchair as if it were a toy. The chair rocked, it dipped dangerously. For an instant she felt the world tilt, metal, wood, and a flash of the sky, and then the chair steadied. That pause, that breath, was everything. Marissa's heart hammered. Shame crept in not for what had happened to her body, but because people were watching and doing nothing. Faces turned away. A couple with ice cream quickened their pace. A man with a camera scrolled on his phone as if the scene were a visual accessory rather than a person in front of him. Silence arrived like a physical weight. She remembered the accident differently in that silence, less a moment of medical detail than a quiet inventory of the ways the world could suddenly feel precarious. Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak up, but the words were lodged like pebbles. She felt small and furious and naked in a way that had nothing to do with her wheelchair. When the same boy said plainly, "Move," it wasn't merely a command. It was a complete erasure in one syllable. The crowd's inaction rang louder than the boy's voice. A low sound shifted the air. At first, it might have been mistaken for distant traffic. A rumble folded into the afternoon. Then it grew, an organized, rolling pulse that vibrated underfoot and tugged at the cotton candy flags on the booths. Engines came into focus like thunder approaching over water. Chrome flashed across the pier like a sudden bright tide. They arrived not as a threat, but as a wall. Bikers dismounted with the practiced, quiet efficiency of people who know how to move together. Leather jackets, some patches catching the sun, boots that hit the wood without hurry. They closed ranks around Marissa more than around the bench. Boots and bikes forming a human and metal shield with enough space for her to breathe. It was a shape of protection that didn't shout. It simply set itself between her and the men who had pushed her dignity aside. The leader stepped forward. He was a tall, silver-bearded man whose years were written in the calm of his eyes rather than in his clothes. He moved in a way that suggested authority without menace. No blaze of chest puffing, no angry show. He crouched down to meet Marissa at eye level, careful not to tower, careful not to assume anything about what she needed. When he spoke, his voice was low and steady. "You're safe now," he said. Those words landed like a hand on a shoulder. They did not solve the humiliation, but they shifted its weight. The boy who had kicked the chair swallowed. The other two took a step back, as if the air had grown thinner around them. The leader's presence was not an invitation to violence. It was a boundary set with steady, non-escalatory force. He did not threaten, he did not promise to avenge. He simply made clear that the humiliation would not continue. Small gestures did more than any speech. One of the bikers, middle-aged, with a camera slung and a gentle laugh lines around their eyes, offered a thumbs up to Marissa, not as a patronizing sign, but as a human acknowledgement that she had been seen. Another placed a hand lightly on the back of the wheelchair, steadying it with careful, respectful contact, then withdrew it as if to show that her autonomy was intact. The leader stayed crouched until she nodded, until the tightness in her jaw eased by a hair, until the tilt of her shoulders changed from defense to something resembling relaxation. Phones emerged, not as instruments of neglect this time, but as tools of bearing witness. The crowd that had looked away before now leaned in. A ripple passed down the boardwalk. Surprise, then shame, then a collective motion toward accountability. Applause rose, tentative at first, then stronger. People stepped forward to offer water, to hold a jacket against her shoulders, to say, "Are you all right?" Those questions were not intrusive. They were repair. The three boys retreated, their bravado shrinking under the patient, observational stare of the bikers. No punches were thrown, no one was humiliated further by a theatrics of retribution. The bikers' formation dissolved as naturally as it had formed. They mounted their bikes with the same unhurried care and, one by one, rolled away, engines fading like distant drums. Their intervention had been a containment rather than a confrontation, an assertion that some kinds of public cruelty do not pass without consequence. In the days that followed, a clip of the moment circulated widely. People debated the ethics of recording versus intervening. They argued about why so many had looked away. But most comments traced the line of the larger truth the scene revealed. Silence protects the harmful. Voices mattered. The clip became, for many, a mirror. It showed how quickly a sunny place could be transformed by cruelty, and how a small, deliberate act of protection could restore more than safety. For Marissa, the moment was both private and public. She did not want her pain to be a spectacle, yet the fact that strangers stepped in had reminded her of something she had been trying to reclaim: visibility without pity. She replayed the afternoon in her head not as a simple sequence of wrong and right, but as a complex lesson. There were those who refused to look. There were those who pulled her into sight. There were people whose indifference had been an accident of distraction, and others whose attention turned into action. The bikers' arrival did not erase the earlier cowardice of the crowd, but it changed what came next. The applause didn't mend the moment, but it made clear that people could still correct their course. Marissa sat on the pier long after the bikes left, watching the Ferris wheel steady as if nothing immense had happened at all. In the water's reflection, she saw herself not as a victim to be pitied, but as someone who had been protected, briefly, gently, by people who chose to act. The feeling was fragile and complicated, relief braided with embarrassment and with a stubborn, cautious hope. The story became a conversation about who we notice, how we respond, and the small power ordinary people have when they decide not to look away. It reminded others that protection can take forms that are quiet but decisive, forming a human barrier, crouching to meet someone's eyes, offering a single steady phrase, "You're safe now." It reminded us that dignity is not restored by spectacle, but by being recognized as a full person in public life. What would you do if you saw someone being humiliated on a pier, in a store, in a school hallway? Would you record, look away, or step in? This is not about bravado. It's about choices. to speak, to step between, to call for help, to hold someone's gaze and say simply, "I see you." That day at the pier, a girl who wanted to feel ordinary again found that being seen could come from the most unexpected direction, and that seeing back, truly, could change everything. If this moved you, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and leave "Kindness Protects" in the comments so others know you stand with those who are seen.